Hi everyone, welcome back to this occasional series for model makers focusing on improving kits, scratch building and problem solving. My name's Steve Andrews and I'm currently working on the kit you can see behind me, Italer's F104C Starfighter. The full blog so far is over on a website called Aeroscale, so if you want to check out progress, go and have a look there. What I'm going to do in this video is something in particular that really looks at how we can improve kit parts using Photoetch, or what we need to do to prepare the part for Photoetch and how to work with it. The part in question is this little thing. I'm hoping it's going to focus. Yes, it's just about focused. Come on, cooperate. There we go. This little part, it's not very big as you can see, is the bit that sits behind the cockpit. It's the electronics bay for the F104C. The kit provides a door, so this can be lifted up. So the whole cockpit assembly plus this is going to really provide a nice detailed area to draw the eye to. And that's really what I want to do, enhance this particular kit part so that we take it from the good, and it's not too bad, this could really work well with a little bit of scratch building and some painting, to something that's really, really as good as it possibly can be. Because that's my objective of building this kit. I really want to throw everything at it. So as I said, this video is not going to focus on an end-to-end build or a kit review. Go and check out the blog on Aeroscale if you want to see where I've got to so far and learn a little bit about the kit. If you want to see what I do to combine this with some Photoetch, how I remove detail to prepare the surface for Photoetch, work with the Photoetch itself, and use references to try and get a combination of the kit part, Photoetch, plus some scratch building, to really make it as good as it can be, then stick around. That's what this video is going to focus on. By the way, if you've got better ideas, if you watch this and see some of the techniques I use and you've got better ways of doing things, then please leave some comments below. Tell me what you like to do. Or if you just have any thoughts about how it's going, what you would like to see me do, or anything at all about the F104 kit that Italer has produced, then you're more than welcome. So that's the introduction. The next thing we're going to do is have a look at removing some of this detail to prepare the part for the Photoetch. So like any kit, the first thing we're going to do is have a look at the instructions. There's not really much to look at in terms of the Italeri ones because we're looking at one piece here. But Edward provided us with these neat instructions that tell us what to do in order to prepare the kit part for improvement. You can see here that the areas marked in red are the areas we have to remove. There's quite a lot to come off of this little piece. What I do when I'm preparing to work with Photoetch is study these quite carefully and keep going back and forth between the kit part and the Photoetch and comparing and having a look and trying to imagine how it's all going to fit together. I find a little bit of planning in advance really helps rather than diving straight in, because you can start to anticipate some problems or choices. One of the things of note in this particular piece is you can see down the middle here, the Edward instructions would have you leave this raised area. Now actually when you look at the part itself, there's some handles that we replace with Photoetch that overlap this area. So it's going to be really difficult to get those handles off and leave this piece intact. It's almost inevitable that it's going to get scratched and notched however careful you are. So my little plan here is actually to take the whole thing off, to use the Photoetch supplied, excuse me, and then to replace this bit with a thin strip of plastic. Should be easy. So that just gives you a little bit of insight into some of the choices we can make. You don't have to slavishly follow the instructions, and I think a little bit of thought and a little bit of awareness about your skill levels and what you're comfortable with doing can really help you to decide the best approach. In terms of the parts themselves, then this is what we're going to be working with. So here's the kit part that I've already showed you. Here are the handles and that raised area I was talking about as well. And these are the two pieces of Photoetch that Edward supply. Now if you've been reading my blog on Aeroscale, you'll know that I'm not a big fan of this pre-printed Photoetch. It comes with an adhesive back, which doesn't feel terribly adhesive, I have to say. And in terms of these parts, basically what we've got here is a very thick decal. There's very little of this that's raised in any way, and it's going to add much detail. So I'm probably not going to use much of this unless it's really essential. I'm going to focus much more on these pieces, which are adding detail and depth And because my approach is going to be to paint this whole thing anyway, I'm not really minding about losing these little decal areas. I've got a fairly big spares box, and I'm confident that if I go to the spares box and look at references, then I'll be able to find something that, even if it's not an exact match to these decals, will be something very close. Certainly good enough to fool the eye from the kind of distances that people who regard my models are going to be looking at it from. So there are the parts. That's what we're going to be working with. This one, we're going to take him off because, as I said, unless it's essential, we are not going to be using those. And that leaves us with these two pieces. The first step is actually going to be to remove a fairly large chunk. We have to take all this off. So that's going to involve a tool which I didn't show you actually. I didn't realise when I was talking earlier that we have to take such a large amount off. We're going to go for a saw. We have to remove these parts, and probably a knife, and probably this as well. So that'll be the first step actually. It's going to be a fairly big piece of surgery, which always makes me a bit nervous because there's, you know, there's the chance of messing this up, but we'll have to be very careful. So next up, surgery. Put your mask and goggles on. So, as you can see, I've fairly crudely marked up the part using a felt tip pen to show which areas we need to remove. There's actually some fairly tricky cutting here because we have to leave bits behind. There's some awkward angles to get round, and in places we actually need to make sure that the material that's left behind is good for bits of Photoetch to fit to. So this is going to be a tricky little job and require a bit of thought. Come on camera, focus, there we go. My favourite tool for taking pieces of plastic out is a razor saw. This is an Alpha blade fitted to a Tamiya handle, but there are lots of different ones on the market. There's some particularly nice Photoetch ones as well. The difference between using a razor saw like this and a good old-fashioned craft knife is that the craft knife is going to split the material, so it's going to do that, it's going to push it apart. Whereas the razor saw is going to take material out. So when you're working with them, you'll probably notice, right, that when you're working away with a saw, you leave sawdust behind, or in this case, plastic dust. That's the material that's being removed. If you work with a knife, there isn't any because it's splitting it. So we have to bear that in mind, because when we use a knife, what happens is that the plastic literally does get split. It kind of goes like that. And these little edges often become raised. The advantage of a knife is that it can get into little nooks and crannies. The advantage of the razor saw is that it will take material out without damaging the part next to it. So I'm going to use a combination of all sorts of stuff here. I'm going to use the razor saw, I'm going to use the craft knife, I'm probably going to have to get in there from time to time with the chisel, particularly when it comes to finishing things up. And possibly I'll have to kind of improvise a little bit. It's actually rather tricky little area to get into. But we'll start with the easy bit. The easy part is actually taking the saw and cutting in here. It's easy because there's already a recessed line that will guide the saw, and there's really nothing to get in the saw's way. It looks like it's fairly thin plastic as well. So we'll get into that. I'll do parts and then I'll come back and show you how we're getting on. So to start with, what we're going to do is make our first incision. The first incision is going to be along this line here. You can see I'm using the razor saw, and I'm just going to use the panel line that's there as a guide and start very gently cutting. The key to doing this is to start gentle. It's a bit like sanding down something big. Let the tool do the work for you, which means in this case not pressing too hard, and start to remove material. You can see I make a little line there. You might be able to see that. I don't know if you can. And I suspect my camera is going to do what it always does. Yeah, I'm having real trouble with focus for some reason. You're going to cooperate? Nearly. Okay, well it's not. But anyway, I'm going to show you a little bit. It's not particularly interesting. All I'm doing really is pressing gently, letting the saw do the work for me, and occasionally changing the angle a little bit so that I start to create a guide for when I move into a new part of the piece. Down there, for example. Just sawing away lightly. You get the impression, I think. So I'm going to finish this up because I think it's probably going to be a bit boring watching this, and then I'll come back and show you where I get to. Hi guys, well I'm part way through this work and I've decided to switch to this little thing. This is a Photoetch blade. It's a Tamiya Photoetch blade, and the reason I'm switching is because there's some really fiddly work in here. It's actually quite hard. You've got to get into, let me show you. You've got to get into these areas. Sorry, there we go. You've got to get into these areas and slice away material while leaving some other areas intact. What I'm doing to get in there is using a combination of a chisel, not a blade actually. I found the chisel's better because it can get right up against areas like this. I've taken some photos because I'm struggling here to get the focus right. A combination of the chisel into appropriate areas to lever away the edge of the material, and then hopefully when I've got that out far enough, there are one or two areas where I can use the blade. I prefer to use a saw if I can, because inevitably a chisel and a knife, they're going to damage the area that I want left. But you know, sometimes you can't achieve perfection, right? You can start to see already that there's a bit of damage, but actually those areas that are damaged are ones that I'm going to remove anyway. So yeah, it's a kind of, you know, a case of figuring out which tool is right for the job, experimenting a little bit, and desperately trying at the same time not to cut away areas that I want to preserve. The other thing is that at this stage, I've also resorted to these beauties as well, because actually I'm working so closely that I can't really see what I'm doing without these. One of the problems of old age, I think. So, after some cutting and various other things, plus a change of equipment as well, you see I've got the headphones on now because I realised the sound wasn't so bad, wasn't so good in the piece I was just doing. We are ended up with something like this. Not everything that I need to take off has been removed here, but you can see that a main piece is gone. There's still an area here to take off, but I thought the path of least resistance was to take this chunk out and then cut round the remaining bits. You can probably see that there's a fairly jagged edge here as well as I peek through. That's okay, as long as the cutting is accurate and it hasn't gone into material we want to preserve. I don't mind too much about that jagged edge, because of course it's going to be fairly easy to sand it down and to correct it if we really need to with bits of plastic card or a little bit of filling. So I'm going to carry on and take this edge off. I'm not going to film it because it's going to be a pain, I think, and it's probably going to take half an hour or so of, you know, slow cutting and what have you. But I'll come back and show you what the finished item looks like, and then we can start to think about the next step.